Mick Schumacher, son of the legendary seven-time champion Michael Schumacher, hasn't been in Formula One long enough to have competitive options lined up for him. And as he's on the verge of losing his Haas seat, he's moving on to reserve driver roles. Mercedes is torn between the German driver and Daniel Ricciardo. In this video, let's talk about if Mercedes is gonna go with Schumacher for the 2023 season. First off, Mick Schumacher might be moving on to other options. If we're being totally honest, this season hasn't been the best for him. In fact, Haas will announce who's going to partner up with Kevin Magnussen on the team for the upcoming season. And we're not trying to point fingers, but we all know Nico Hulkenberg is probably going to grab the seat. And you know what that means. Schumacher's going to be left without a race seat after 2 years at Formula One with Haas. All the other teams on the grid already got their drivers signed up for 2023, so clearly there's no place for Schumacher right now. On top of that, he's also probably going to lose his ties with the Ferrari Driver Academy right by the end of this year, so he's up for negotiations with other teams. And while that opens a world of opportunities, do you think that maybe it's too late? Well, for a race seat, yes, but he's still got the option of a reserve driver's seat for 2023, at least until he gets a couple of competitive options on board, because right now he's got nothing to choose from. As for the Mercedes team principal, Toto Wolff, he said that he'd be pretty interested in talking to the German for a reserve driver role at their team. But wait, weren't they considering Daniel Ricciardo for it? Well, we'll get onto that later. Following up, Schumacher might have a future at Mercedes. As of now, Wolff says that he's not too sure about Mick's status at Haas. But the most important thing right now for the German driver is to get a racing cockpit. Although, let's not forget that he even mentioned how the Schumacher family is a part of Mercedes. And he obviously loves his personality too. After all, Mick definitely has a legacy behind him that we just can't ignore. Having said that, Wolff mentioned that if the reserve driver role is a possibility, they're definitely going to consider it. But right now, he needs to end up in a racing cockpit because, let's be honest, can we risk a sabbatical? Of course not. He hasn't been around long enough or grabbed enough wins to survive it. Yes, we know he's a great driver and we've seen his talent, but he's going to have to prove a lot more on the F1 grid if he wants to stick around long enough. Not to mention, the Schumacher family has its own history with Mercedes. Let's talk about his father, Michael, for a second. The seven-time world champion made his legendary F1 comeback with Mercedes back in 2010. In fact, he even raced for 3 seasons right before he retired for good at the end of the 2012 campaign. Having said that, he also raced for the team early on in his career as a part of its sports car team back in 1990. And let's just remind you that this was right before his F1 debut with Jordan at the 1991 Belgian Grand Prix. Fast forward to now, and Mercedes really needs to sign a new reserve driver for 2023 because, let's face it, their actual backups, Nick de Vries and Stoffel van Dorn, went to secure their roles elsewhere. On the one hand, de Vries is going to be racing full-time with AlphaTauri from the next season. On the other hand, van Dorn is going to join Aston Martin as a reserve driver. As for Haas, the team handed Schumacher his F1 debut back in 2021, right after his Formula 2 title victory in 2020. But let's not forget how much he struggled to match his teammate Kevin Magnussen throughout the season, and that's probably why he's not going to be racing for Haas anymore. The closest he's come to a victory was when he scored a best finish of 6th at the Austrian Grand Prix this year, but ever since 2021, he's only recorded 2 top 10 finishes during his time with Haas, both of which came in this year. Coming up, Schumacher was humbled to hear about Mercedes' interest in a reserve role. It was definitely a game changer for the F1 driver in every way. In fact, right when all the seats on the F1 grid were taken, he was left evaluating his options for the upcoming season. And let's not forget that Wolff wasn't even ready to offer the reserve driver role unless Mick was sure he'd let go of the Haas seat, because at the end of the day, Wolff wanted the German driver to have his best shot at Formula One. As for Mick, right after qualifying in Abu Dhabi, he said, "Mercedes is an awesome brand, and what they've achieved in Formula One is incredible. For sure, I'm looking at my options, and Mercedes is a part of it." And thanks to the Schumacher legacy with the team, Wolff was ready to sign him for the team. But as of now, nothing's on paper yet. On the other hand, Mick wants to take a look at all of his options before making the right decision for himself. What's more, Mercedes is torn between Ricciardo and Schumacher. Just a few weeks ago, there were some pretty strong negotiations between Daniel Ricciardo and Mercedes. In fact, it all started when he was running out of competitive options, and the team came forward with a reserve driver role for 2023, implying that once Lewis Hamilton retires in the upcoming season, the Australian can replace him in 2024. But as soon as the rumors made headlines, the seven-time champion made it pretty clear that he was not going anywhere. In fact, just recently, Wolff and Hamilton confirmed that he'd got his eyes set on a record-breaking 8th World Championship, and they're probably going to be talking about a multi-year contract over the winter, like they did the last time around. So with that, whether the Australian accepts it or not, his chances died at Mercedes. Don't get us wrong, the reserve driver position was still up for him, but could he see a future for himself there? Probably not. And now Mick has come into the picture, so the team needs to choose someone. But things got easier when Red Bull came along with a reserve driver offer for Ricciardo. Up next, Wolff admits Mercedes are clueless. Right after they ended their winless Formula One season in Brazil, Wolff was pretty confused about why they were so much faster than Ferrari and Red Bull. As for George Russell, he scored his first ever Formula One victory at Interlagos, with his teammate Hamilton joining in at second to celebrate the first Mercedes 1-2 since the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix back in 2010. At the same time, it was also the team's first Grand Prix victory of the season, in which they struggled to compete with Ferrari and Red Bull for any race wins because of some recurring issues with their car. On the other hand, Verstappen and Charles Leclerc were involved in accidents at Interlagos that pretty much messed up their races, while Russell was controlling the action right at the front of the field. And if we're being honest, Hamilton was the only threat he had up there. At the same time, while Wolff knows he had the fastest package all weekend, he's not too sure why the advantage over the other teams was so great. Going back, it's probably a collection of the parts they put into the car, but they've seen a positive trend in the last 3 years. As for dominance, they're not there yet. In fact, the team boss said that Abu Dhabi was probably more difficult on paper, but the team suffers from high drag compared to their rivals. But as for why they were so far ahead of everyone else, Wolff isn't too sure. Finally, Mercedes is probably gonna go with Mick for the 2023 season. Since he's fairly new to Formula One, he'd probably want to go for a race seat, and that's the best option for him anyway. But since that's not going to happen, a reserve driver role at Mercedes is his best bet. Although let's not forget that Hamilton isn't leaving anytime soon, and George Russell is pretty much the future of the team. So replacing one of the two drivers isn't an option for Mick right now either. At the same time, while Ricciardo was tough competition for the same seat, he's moved on to Red Bull as the third driver on the team. So that clears the way for the German driver, who's probably going to end up with Mercedes now right after the ruthless Haas axe. And who knows, this might actually prove to be a game changer for him, which is something he definitely needs in his F1 career right now. That's a wrap for this video. What's your take on Mick Schumacher moving on to Mercedes for a reserve driver role? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.